In a time of profound social and cultural change, an entire generation of young Americans stood united in their desire for more powerful cars, fueling the greatest horsepower war in automotive history. Screeching rubber through turns, roaring down back streets and country lanes, were fun-loving drivers in their wild and powerful dream machines. Just about anyone could afford to fly down the road in a boldly styled, attention-grabbing American icon, the muscle car. Hello, I'm Chip Foose, coming to you from the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California. By the end of the 1960s, the pony car craze had reached critical mass. Ford and GM had sold millions of their flagship Mustang and Camaro models, outpacing even the incredible sales figures of traditional mid-sized muscle cars. Of course, Chrysler was not about to cede the stage to its rivals. The men from MOPAR had their own pony-style performance cars in the works. And by the end of the decade, they would unleash some of the most celebrated American cars in history upon an adoring public.
Chrysler had the reputation, and I think deservedly so, for engineering. And if you look at a lot of the innovations that came out of the muscle car era, a lot of it came out of Chrysler.
Chrysler and motorsports really have gone hand to hand for a long time, but the MOPAR crowd, they stuck with MOPAR to the exclusion of everything else. They had a laser-like focus on that particular vehicle, that brand. You don't even bother acknowledging the rest of the stuff. Those are just victims waiting for me to beat.
Much of Chrysler's success in the marketplace came courtesy of their dominance on the drag strip. Hoping to continue this trend of win on Sunday, sell on Monday, Chrysler made available to their factory drag racers a new type of quarter-mile racer.
So they went back to Chrysler and said, we need something special for Superstock. And they actually went and designed and manufactured, putting a very large engine into the smallest body style they had, which was called an A body, which would have been the Plymouth Barracuda. And today, those are still the legendary, fastest Superstock cars that has ever hit the drag strip.
This Sox and Martin monster of the drag strip, one of just 50 Hemi-equipped Barracudas that Plymouth built in 1968, was never available to the general public. It was purpose-built for the quarter mile and could pull mid-10 ETs.
They have fiberglass noses. They have special glass in the cars for the side windows. They're called Corian glass. They were doing everything they could to adjust weight.
Building on the success of their drag racers and the popularity of their big block power plants, Chrysler substantially redesigned the Barracuda in 1970. The new Cuda was based on a new E-body design, a shorter, wider version of Chrysler's existing B-body, which underpinned the bulk of Chrysler's muscle car offerings.
Chrysler was a little bit late getting into the game in terms of the actual size of the car and the performance options. They were a little late in getting into the competition scene with it, but they did.
Now sporting the Mustang-like long hood and short deck, this was Mopar's first true pony car with a lot more room under the hood than previous Barracudas. Finally, the Hemi-equipped Cuda was made available to the average Joe.
The Ford guys, the Chevy guys were ahead of them with a lot of things that were better in their automobiles. So Chrysler threw a huge, vast array of options and colors to play the game of we gotcha. And in 1970 was the peak of all of those options coming together on the option pad.
The 1970 Hemi Cuda is to this day considered one of the most desirable muscle cars ever built, and it's easy to see why. Engine options alone ran to 9, with the Hemi the most powerful of the lot.
The Hemi Cuda is on the top of the food chain when you're talking about later 60s muscle cars. It had the ultimate street muscle car motor, the 426 Hemi, and aesthetically it's as pleasing as any car ever built in the 60s.
The Shaker hood scoop came standard with the 1970 Hemi Cuda. and the car also featured heavy-duty suspension, rally wheels, optional 727 torque flight automatic transmission, and hydraulic lifters for better low RPM power. Color options ran riot, producing some of the era's most eye-catching cars, including this model, one of only 2 Hemi Cudas to be tastefully attired in Moulin Rouge pink. Coming up, the Big Three from Detroit is challenged by the little guy from Wisconsin.
You don't show up at a gunfight with a knife. You need to have a bigger gun.
It's easy to forget now, but the Big Three weren't the only game in town when it came to auto production in the 60s and 70s. In 1954, the Hudson Motor Car Company merged with Nash Kelvinator to create American Motors, also known as AMC. The company's founding mission was to compete with Detroit for domestic car sales, and they achieved early success with rather bland compact cars like the Rambler. But by the late 60s, AMC was ready to challenge the Big Three for muscle car supremacy. It was a true David and Goliath battle, but this time, David didn't wield a sling, but a javelin.
American Motors, in the performance history of things, somewhat not looked upon as a major player, and I think that's a disservice. They may not have had the success, the emphasis, the marketing of the other respective competitive companies, but they competed.
Introduced in 1968, the AMX was positioned more as a competitor to the Corvette than as a true blue muscle car. AMC really opened the eyes of the public with their sporty 2-seat coupe, the American Motors Experimental.
The whole concept of it was big motor in the front, small car behind. It's a very lightweight, and it is a sleeper. When you're filling up at a gas station, somebody will come up to you inevitably and say, I knew somebody down the street that had one of those. Boy, those are fast cars. But they don't look it. It doesn't look like it goes as fast as it really does. But I think it's the acceleration rate that you feel in the car and you get. Take no prisoners is, I think, the motto here.
This all-original Survivor in Laurel Green features American Motors' most powerful engine available in '68, a 390 cubic inch V8, along with a Borg-Warner 3-speed automatic with floor console mounted shifter. Otherwise, it's a fairly bare-bones car with few exotic options. But when it came to the AMX, that was sort of the point.
There's very few accessories that you could even order on the car. You bought the basic car and you got a muscle car. It was the bargain basement muscle car of 1968. I think it was just a little over $3,700 out the door. You didn't have to spend another $1,000, $1,500 buying the bigger engine, buying the bigger tires, buying the special transmission. It's the everyday man's muscle car. You don't need a lot of money to own it. You don't need a lot of brains to own it. You don't need a lot of skill to own it because it drives very nicely.
And with their meager resources, they did field some competitive vehicles back then. The early Javelins with the 390 engine were very competitive pony cars against Firebirds and Barracudas and the like.
The 1970 Javelin SST represented AMC's best stab at a mass-produced pony car. A fairly robust 390 cubic inch V8 with a 4-barrel carb produced a respectable 325 horsepower, nestled under a power blister hood that functioned as a cold air induction system. A 4-speed Javelin could go from 0 to 60 in 6.8 seconds. The twin venturi grille and long hood fit the Javelin's pony car image, as did the wheelbase, nearly identical to Mopar E-bodies and GM F-bodies. And the paint job? It was just as eye-catching as anything produced by the Big Three.
What better way to define a car with America in its name than painting it red, white, and blue? You have American Motors. This is America's company. Paint it red, white, and blue. Give it stripes and stars if you want, but that helps it stand out. And they made a lot of cars that were available in those colors. Perfect for America by American Motors.
Despite the zip of the Javelin and AMX, it wasn't enough to overcome the stigma of being built by a car company primarily known for inexpensive compact cars. especially when compared to competing pony cars from the Big Three.
American Motors' efforts were laudable. Though they came up a bit short, they showed some imagination compared to the competition that just didn't have what it took under the hood, and sales suffered.
They couldn't throw the development resources into something like Ford, Chrysler, or General Motors could do. They just didn't have that. And they were known for compact cars. They were known for economy cars, as we defined them at the time. They were known for cars that made sense. And muscle cars didn't make sense, which in a way was their whole appeal.
Still ahead, MOPAR's most versatile muscle car.
You could road race it a little bit, you could drag race it, drive it every day. It's that type of car.
(1970) was the year that Chrysler went all in on pony cars with their new E platform. In addition to the redesigned Barracuda, Chrysler also debuted a brand new model, the Dodge Challenger. Chrysler's new E-bodies were the strongest possible response to the domination of the market by Ford and Chevy. And while the low-end cars were no more impressive than the base model six-cylinder Mustangs and Camaros, high-end Cudas and Challengers would make their presence felt in ways that went beyond raw horsepower. With Chrysler, performance was never going to be an issue. But what caught the muscle car world by surprise is how visually appealing the new E-bodies were.
The Cuda and the Challenger were really a beautiful car. They did a nice job when they got into them the second or third year, and the lines were really nice on those cars. And you could, again, identify those cars from a long ways away, and they were just beautiful cars all the way around.
Chrysler had some of the best modelers in the business. They knew how to tickle the surface so it just looked right. And that Challenger, they tickled all the right surfaces as far as I'm concerned, and the Barracuda the same way.
Of course, in the muscle car era, good looks could only take you so far. While the Hemi-equipped E-bodies had horsepower to spare, some of Chrysler's other engine options provided an arguably better driving car, especially the lauded 340 cubic inch V8.
They were more set up to look like, feel like, handle a little bit more like road racer, canyon carving type cars. 426 car, you do not want to take that in Mulholland Drive and try to, chase some Z28 or 340 Trans Am six-pack car through there. It just is not going to be a successful formula for you.
They were six-packs, three deuces, and they were designed ostensibly for Trans Am. That's what the TA stood for. So I've driven a couple of 340 TAs. And they're wonderfully balanced automobiles with the 340 cubic inch engine with the 3.2 barrels, the six-pack option. The engine would just spin up in a heartbeat. It made a wonderful sound.
Dodge built 2,500 Challenger TAs in order to fulfill Trans Am homologation requirements. The 340 cubic inch engine was rated by Dodge at 290 horsepower, but probably made more like 320. And it was fed by an enormous molded hood scoop. This example from the Wellborn Muscle Car Museum features the EB3 light blue metallic exterior and the blue B5 interior. It's equipped with a pistol grip Hurst shifter, special rally suspension, and an Edelbrock manifold, along with thick racing stripes and a fiberglass ducktail rear spoiler. At $4,200, the car wasn't cheap, but the street version of the TA looked ready to tackle a racetrack.
The Challenger was a little more upscale, just a little baby step upscale from the Cuda. A little bit better appointments, a little bit longer actually, had a slightly longer wheelbase, so you had a more comfortable ride.
But it was a good all-purpose high performance. You could road race it a little bit, you could drag race it, drive it every day. It's that type of car.
Facing off against the Challenger in Trans Am racing and in showrooms was the 340-equipped All-American Racers limited edition AAR Cuda. This FE5 Rally Red example features a smaller hood scoop than the Challenger with pistol grip shifter and optional rear window louvers.
Of course, Dodge promoted their Challenger in a different way from way Plymouth promoted the Cuda, and they were major rivals. They were divisions, but they were very competitive to rule the roost.
The AAR Cuda, save for racing decals and lack of a shaker hood scoop, is nearly identical to its Hemi-equipped brethren. In 1970, It served as the car of choice for All-American Racers legendary driver Dan Gurney and racing partner Swede Savage, as they mounted a full-fledged assault on Trans Am racing. Thanks to revised engine requirements, they were allowed to run an engine larger than 5 liters, and the 340 engine acquitted itself well in the series.
The 340 cubic inch V8 doesn't sound like a lot. It's what, 5.6 liter in today's lingo. A lot of good torque, a lot of power right off idle. You would be able to waste a set of tires without even trying. And yet the wheelbase, because it was the pony car, was a bit shorter than your conventional muscle car. So you had some nimbleness, you had some manners. You know, this wasn't a big lumbering bear, and it wasn't a ballerina, but it wouldn't embarrass itself either when you really wanted to start handling a road with curves.
Coming up, MOPAR's clever superstars up the strip.
Chrysler had put down a directive, do not ever park next to a stock-bodied car in the pits, because it will start to be noticed the changes that were done to the car. Tech never caught what was going on in these cars.
While small block Cudas and Challengers took on all comers in Trans Am, MOPAR's main focus in 1970 was on the quarter mile. Looking to continue the company's domination of NHRA stock classes during the 60s, Hemi-equipped E-platform cars were made available to many of Chrysler's highest profile drag racers, including Dick Landy and Ronnie Sox for the new Pro Stock class. Chrysler's success gave Ford and GM a good look at the competition, but usually only the taillights. MOPAR factory drag racers had been clamoring for a new weapon to take to the drag strip, and in 1970, Chrysler offered them a bazooka.
Hemi was the ultimate. So few cars built. I mean, when you look at the production numbers, or you look at those cars on display somewhere, it's a Hemi. They know the 4 letters. Sox and Martin, Landy, you know, all those guys, you know, got paid by the factory, and the factories promoted that, but it worked.
Superstock was still considered grassroots. So they wanted a true pro class because they were professionals. And they wanted a faster car to be able to modify them more, but still keep the spirit of a car that the factory can sell, that the factory would get behind a class like this. From that point, we have a new class called Pro Stock. So here we have something brand new starting from a production body. And it quickly changed and accelerated.
Just as 340 Challengers and Cudas went wheel to wheel on road tracks, Hemi-equipped versions did battle on the drag strip, and no one represented the Challenger better than Dick Landy.
And so I think the fame and the promotion of the Cuda and the Challenger were at the drag strip. Dick Landy and the Challenger, Ronnie Sox and the Cuda. So I think really it was his drag racing heritage, especially in '70 when they completely reconfigured the Cuda body and made it into a true pony car.
But by 1971, drag racers were on the cusp of an entirely different breed of car.
So it was much, much closer to what you would buy off the showroom floor with some modifications to it. Well, it didn't take the racers very long to start really modifying these cars, and they became a world unto themselves in terms of relationship with their original design and manufacture.
The next era of change was they got acid-dipped body and built cars from scratch, still completely resembling a factory car, but it massively went on a diet. The acid-dipped cars, they did some major technology changes in them.
Dick Landy's 1971 Challenger featured several changes from the 1970 version, but by then, the MOPAR drag racers and their rivals were busy taking the stock out of Pro Stock.
Chrysler had put down a directive, do not ever park next to a stock-bodied car in the pits, because it will start to be noticed the changes that were done to the car. Tech never caught what was going on in these cars.
While these Hemi Cudas and Hemi Challengers were fearsome on the drag strip, they were a bit of a handful for anyone driving farther than a quarter mile.
MOPAR had to put that engine in a street vehicle. It never liked to totter to the grocery store. The 426 Hemi lived for full throttle applications.
The 426 Hemi, obviously when in perfect tune, was unbeatable. But a lot of guys like myself driving around in a 426 Hemi couldn't keep it that way. You had 2 4-barrels, you had dual point distributors, so we couldn't keep it in perfect tune.
If you had a Hemi, you pretty much were determined to go racing. That was a race engine that just they had to put in a street car. They took a little bit of maintenance, and they were kind of cold-blooded. Most of them didn't like cold weather. But a good running Hemi, oh lordy, they're fast. And the sound of a Hemi around 5,000 RPM, and put the hair on the back of your neck up.
When equipped with powerful big block engines, the stylish Challengers and Cudas may just well represent the absolute zenith of the muscle era. The smaller, more agile E-bodies from Chrysler, as well as the pony cars from Ford, General Motors, and AMC, would compete with the mid-size big block cars on the track, showroom, and in the hearts of the public. From the Marconi Automotive Museum in Tustin, California, I'm Chip Foose. We'll see you next time on American Icon. In a time of profound social and cultural change, an entire generation of young Americans stood united in their desire for more powerful cars, fueling the greatest horsepower war in automotive history. Screeching rubber through turns, roaring down back streets and country lanes, were fun-loving drivers in their wild and powerful dream machines.